The massive arena stretched across 3 kilometers of gleaming metal and crystal, packed with beings from every corner of the galaxy. Tentacled creatures floated in specialized atmosphere pods while insectoid delegates clicked excitedly in their viewing boxes. The air buzzed with the sounds of 100 different languages as translators worked overtime to keep up with the chatter. At the center of it all lay the death track. For over 1,000 years, this nightmare course had stood as the ultimate test of piloting skill in the galaxy. The track twisted and coiled through space like a giant metal snake, filled with traps that had killed thousands of the best pilots ever born. Plasma storms that could melt starships in seconds. Gravity wells that crushed metal into tiny balls. Living asteroids that chased ships and tried to eat them. Time bubbles that made pilots age 100 years in a few heartbeats. Commander Veltar stood on the main platform, his green scales catching the light as he looked out at the crowd. The Draconian was huge even by his species standards, with claws that could tear through steel and eyes like burning coals. A long scar ran down his face from his last attempt at the death track 3 years ago. He had made it further than anyone else in history, almost halfway through before his ship exploded in a ball of fire. Friends of the Federation, Veltar's voice boomed across the arena, we gather today for another attempt at the sacred trial. A new species seeks to join our ranks. The crowd grew quiet, waiting. The humans of the third planet in the Sol system have asked to become members of our great alliance. Laughter erupted from every section of the arena. The insect-like Hivari made clicking sounds that meant they found something very funny. The crystal beings called Nexari rang like broken bells. Even the floating gas creatures of the Etherian Empire puffed out clouds that their kind used for mocking. Veltar raised one clawed hand for silence. These humans claim to be skilled pilots. They say their kind can handle any challenge we might give them. His reptilian lips pulled back to show rows of sharp teeth. So we shall test them in the traditional way. A hologram appeared above the arena showing the death track in all its terrible glory. The crowd watched as the display zoomed in on different sections. The plasma maze came first, walls of burning energy that shifted every few seconds, leaving only narrow gaps for ships to fly through. After that was the gravity garden, where small black holes pulled ships in different directions at once. Then came the living asteroid field, where rocks with primitive minds tried to catch and crush any ship that entered their space. The worst part was the time storm at the end. Ships that entered the swirling purple clouds might come out seconds later as dust, aged to nothing by the warped flow of time itself. Every great species has tried, Veltar continued, his voice growing louder. The Zephyrians, fastest pilots in the galaxy, lasted only minutes before the plasma burned them away. The mechanoids, with their perfect robot reflexes, made it through 3 sections before being crushed flat. The wise Etherians, who can see the future with their minds, still could not avoid the traps that waited for them. A new hologram showed the current record board. Veltar's name sat at the top with a completion rate of 47%. Below him were hundreds of other names from dozens of species, each one marking a life lost to the death track's hungry maw. No being has ever finished the course, Veltar said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the arena. The death track is perfect. It tests everything: speed, skill, technology, intelligence, even luck. It shows us who deserves to sit among the great powers of the galaxy. The crowd murmured its agreement. The death track was more than just a test, it was a symbol. It proved that some challenges could not be beaten, only survived as long as possible. It taught humility to species that thought they were clever or strong. These humans, Veltar continued, are young. Their technology is basic. Their ships are slow. Their reflexes are weak compared to most of our member species. He paused for effect. But they insist they are ready for membership. So let us see how long they can survive our sacred trial. Betting pools opened immediately across the arena. The Zephyrians, with their lightning-fast thoughts, calculated that no human could last more than 15 seconds in the death track. The mechanoids, using their perfect computer brains, gave the humans 17 seconds at most. Even the kindest estimates from the peaceful Etherians only reached 30 seconds. The arena's main screen lit up with incoming ship signatures. Somewhere out in the darkness of space, a human pilot was approaching the death track. Soon they would learn what every other species had discovered, that some challenges could not be won, only endured until failure came calling. The crowd settled in to watch another quick and predictable death, never imagining that in just a few minutes, everything they thought they knew about the impossible would change forever. The small human ship appeared on the arena's main screen like a metal dot against the stars. Captain Lee Daeho guided his fighter toward the massive Federation station, his hands steady on the simple controls. The ship was called Mugunghwa, named after Korea's national flower, though none of the watching aliens knew what the strange symbols on its hull meant. Inside the arena, thousands of beings pressed closer to their viewing screens to get their first look at the human pilot. When Daeho's ship docked and he stepped out onto the platform, a wave of surprised chatter swept through the crowd. He looked so ordinary. The human stood about average height with dark hair and calm brown eyes. He wore a plain gray flight suit with no fancy decorations or high-tech armor. No glowing symbols marked his rank. No special breathing gear helped him survive in alien air. He just walked forward like he was heading to work on any normal day. "Look at him," whispered a Zephyrian observer to his companion. "So slow. So simple. My grandmother moves faster than this creature." The insect-like Hivari delegate studied Daeho through her compound eyes. "Primitive life form," she clicked to her assistants. "Notice the basic muscle structure. Reaction time must be terrible compared to proper species." Even the wise Etherians shook their floating heads in what might have been pity. Through their telepathic network they shared the same thought: this being will die quickly and badly. Daeho seemed unaware of the attention. He walked to the pilot preparation area and began his pre-flight checks with calm efficiency. His movements were precise but unhurried, like someone who had done the same routine thousands of times before. The Federation's chief medical officer, a tall blue creature with 6 arms, approached with a scanner. "Human pilot, we must check your biological readiness for the trial ahead." "Of course," Daeho replied in clear galactic standard language. His accent was strange but understandable. The scanner hummed as it passed over the human's body. The medical officer's face showed confusion as he read the results. "Your heart rate is normal. Stress hormones are within acceptable ranges. Are you perhaps not understanding what you are about to face?" "I understand perfectly," Daeho said with a small smile. "I'm going to fly through your death track." This comment sent new waves of laughter through the arena. The draconian betting pools immediately shifted the odds. 15 seconds became 10 seconds. Some cruel mechanoids started wagering on exactly which section would kill the human first. Daeho requested access to the track's technical specifications, which surprised many observers. Most pilots spent their preparation time meditating, praying, or undergoing last-minute equipment upgrades. The human just sat at a computer terminal, studying numbers and diagrams. Commander Veltar watched from his elevated platform, his scarred face showing mild interest. "What is the human doing?" he asked his aide. "He appears to be examining the track layout, sir. Very carefully. At least he is not completely stupid." Veltar's claws tapped against his armrest. "Though study will not save him from the plasma storms." For 2 hours, Daeho remained at the computer, rotating 3-dimensional models of the death track and making notes on a simple paper pad. This behavior puzzled the aliens watching. Advanced species used quantum computers and neural interfaces for analysis. The human used a pencil. The Zephyrian commentary team provided live analysis for viewers across the galaxy. "The human continues his primitive research methods," the lead commentator said, his words translated into hundreds of languages. "We see no evidence of the advanced preparation techniques used by successful pilots of other species." "Indeed," agreed his colleague. "No neural enhancement procedures. No quantum probability calculations. No temporal prediction algorithms. The human appears to be approaching this challenge with the intellectual tools of a child." What the commentators could not see was the expression on Daeho's face as he studied the track. His engineer's mind, trained in the universities of Earth, was processing the information in ways the aliens had never considered. Where they saw an impossible challenge to be survived, he saw a problem to be solved. The death track's designers had been brilliant, creating obstacles that tested every known form of pilot skill. They had anticipated attacks from above and below, from the left and right, from ships moving fast and slow. They had built defenses against every conceivable approach angle. Almost every angle. As the final hour of preparation arrived, Daeho closed the computer terminal and stood up. His simple flight suit looked even more basic next to the high-tech gear worn by previous challengers whose equipment now decorated the track as wreckage. "Human pilot," announced the arena's artificial intelligence, "please report to your ship for final preparations." Daeho walked toward the Mugunghwa with the same calm pace he had maintained all day. Behind him, 10,000 alien voices rose in excitement as betting reached fever pitch. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had gathered to watch another quick failure, never suspecting that the quiet human with his paper notes and pencil had found something their greatest minds had missed for 1,000 years. The death track waited, hungry as always, but for the first time in its long history, it was about to meet someone who refused to play by the rules. The arena fell completely silent as Daeho climbed into his ship. The Magumwa sat on the launch platform like a small metal box next to the sleek Federation vessels. No glowing energy shields protected its hull. No quantum engines hummed with impossible power. It looked like something a child might build from spare parts. Inside the cockpit, Daeho ran through his final checks with steady hands. The controls were simple: a stick to steer, buttons to fire engines, switches to control basic systems. Everything was labeled in Korean characters that the watching aliens could not read. The ship's computer spoke to him in his native language, its voice calm and familiar. "All systems normal," the computer said. "Ready for departure." Daeho looked out through the small window at the death track stretched before him. The entrance was a swirling wall of plasma that shifted colors from red to blue to white-hot yellow. Beyond that lay the maze of death that had killed so many pilots. For a moment he thought about his family back on Earth, probably sleeping while he prepared to make history. "Control," he said into his radio, "this is Magumwa ready for attempt." The Federation's traffic controller, a creature that looked like a floating jellyfish, responded immediately. "Human pilot, you are cleared to begin when ready. May fortune smile upon your brief journey." Even the controller expected him to die quickly. 10,000 alien beings leaned forward in their seats. Betting pools closed as the final odds were calculated. The Zephyrians gave him 8 seconds. The mechanoids calculated 12 seconds maximum. The wise Etherians, using all their mental powers, predicted the human would survive exactly 14 seconds before becoming space dust. Daeho powered up his engines. The sound was different from the high-pitched whine of advanced ships, more like a deep rumble that reminded him of old aircraft back on Earth. He moved his ship forward toward the track entrance, and every being in the arena held their breath. Then he did something no one expected. Instead of flying into the plasma wall, Daeho pulled his control stick back. The Magumwa lifted up, climbing away from the track entrance. Higher and higher it rose, moving straight up into the empty space above the death track. Confusion rippled through the crowd. The Hivari delegate clicked rapidly in her native language. The Draconian observers roared questions at each other. Even the calm Etherians sent confused thoughts buzzing through their telepathic network. "What is the human doing?" Commander Veltar demanded, his claws scraping against his chair arms. "Has he lost his mind with fear?" The Zephyrian commentators struggled to explain what they were seeing. "The human appears to be climbing? This is highly unusual behavior. Perhaps his primitive brain has malfunctioned under stress." But Daeho kept climbing. His ship rose above the plasma storms, above the gravity wells, above the living asteroids and the time bubbles. The death track spread out below him like a deadly metal snake, all its traps and terrors laid bare from this height. "Control," Daeho said calmly into his radio, requesting confirmation of track rules. "Are there any limits on flight altitude?" The traffic controller paused. In 1,000 years, no pilot had ever asked this question. The death track rules had been written by the galaxy's greatest legal minds, covering every possible situation they could imagine. But this question had never come up. "Please hold, human pilot," the controller said, its voice uncertain for the first time anyone could remember. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Throughout the arena, aliens whispered to each other in growing confusion. Database searches began as Federation officials scrambled to check the official regulations. Finally, the controller returned. "Negative, human pilot. No altitude restrictions are specified in the track regulations." A slow smile spread across Daeho's face. "Thank you, Control. Beginning my run now." What happened next would be talked about across the galaxy for generations. Instead of descending back into the death track's deadly embrace, Daeho simply flew forward. His ship traced a perfect arc over the entire course, sailing peacefully through empty space while far below, the plasma storms raged and gravity wells pulled at nothing and living asteroids searched hungrily for prey that never came. The timer on the main screen counted steadily: 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. The human ship moved at a normal speed, neither racing nor crawling, just flying in a straight line over the top of every obstacle the death track could throw at a pilot. At 28 seconds, the Magumwa began to descend. At 29 seconds, it dropped below the finish line markers. At exactly 30 seconds, Daeho's ship crossed the ending point of the death track and the timer stopped. The arena was dead silent. 10,000 beings stared at the main screen in complete shock. The words "course completed" flashed in bright letters next to a time that seemed impossible: 30 seconds. For the first time in 1,000 years, someone had finished the death track. And they had done it by completely ignoring everything the track was designed to test. Daeho's voice crackled over the radio, calm as ever. "Control, this is Magungwa. Run complete. Requesting permission to dock." The galaxy would never be the same. The silence in the arena stretched on, broken only by the soft hum of life support systems and the distant sound of Daeho's ship docking. 10,000 alien beings sat frozen in their seats, staring at the impossible numbers on the main display. 30 seconds. Course completed. It had to be some kind of mistake. Commander Veltar was the first to break the silence. His roar of rage shook the entire platform as his claws scraped deep grooves in the metal armrests of his chair. "Impossible," he bellowed, rising to his full height. The human cheated. He avoided the entire challenge. The Hivari delegate's compound eyes glittered with confusion and anger. "This is not completion," she clicked rapidly to anyone who would listen. "This is avoidance. Cowardice." The human ran away from the test. But even as the protests grew louder, Federation officials were already checking their computers. Legal experts from a dozen species began scanning through thousands of years of racing regulations, searching for any rule that the human might have broken. The Zephyrian commentary team had gone completely silent, their rapid-fire analysis grinding to a halt. For the first time in their broadcasting careers, they had nothing to say. How could they explain something that had never happened before? In the central judging chamber, Chief Arbiter Zexron materialized in a shower of light. The ancient being's translucent form flickered as he accessed the Federation's vast legal database. His species had helped write the original death track regulations over a millennium ago, and if anyone could find a violation, it would be him. Minutes passed. The crowd grew restless. Some aliens demanded an immediate ruling that the human had failed. Others argued just as loudly that a completion was a completion, regardless of method. Fights broke out in several sections as different species shouted at each other in languages that the translators could barely keep up with. Daeho walked calmly into the arena floor, still wearing his simple flight suit. He seemed completely unaware of the chaos his 30-second flight had caused. When reporters shoved recording devices in his face and shouted questions in dozens of languages, he just smiled politely and waited for the official ruling. "Human." Commander Veltar jumped down from his platform, his massive form towering over the smaller pilot. "You have made a mockery of our sacred trial. You ignored every challenge. You flew around the test like a frightened child." "I completed the course," Daeho replied calmly. "In 30 seconds. You avoided the course." Veltar's eyes blazed with fury. "The death track is meant to test courage, skill, and honor. You showed none of these things." "The death track," Daeho said, his voice still calm, "is meant to test whether a pilot can get from the starting line to the finish line alive. I did that." The simple logic of this statement seemed to confuse the Draconian commander. His mouth opened and closed several times as he searched for an argument that made sense. Other alien delegates crowded around them. The mechanoids demanded a detailed analysis of the human's flight path. The Etherians tried to probe Daeho's mind with their psychic powers, only to find thoughts so different from their own that they could make no sense of them. The floating gas beings of the outer rim puffed angry clouds of protest. Through it all, Chief Arbiter Zexron continued his search of the legal codes. His ancient mind processed centuries of precedent, thousands of court cases, and millions of words of regulation. The death track rules had been written by the galaxy's most careful lawyers, designed to cover every possible situation. But no one had ever thought to write a rule requiring pilots to actually engage with the obstacles. Finally, after what felt like hours, Zexron spoke. His voice carried the weight of absolute legal authority, cutting through all the noise and argument like a blade through paper. "The regulations state clearly," he announced, his words echoing through the suddenly quiet arena, "that a challenger must pilot their vessel from the designated starting point to the designated finishing point. The method of travel between these points is not specified. No minimum engagement with obstacles is required. No particular flight path is mandated." The crowd held its breath. "Furthermore," Zexron continued, "the human pilot did not leave the official course boundaries at any time. He remained within the three-dimensional space designated for the death track challenge. His flight path, while unconventional, violated no existing regulation." Commander Veltar's face went pale beneath his scales. But the spirit of the law. The intent of the challenge. "The law is what is written," Zexron replied firmly. "Not what we intended to write." The human has achieved a valid completion of the death track in the time of 30 seconds, establishing a new record. The arena erupted. Some aliens cheered, amazed by what they had witnessed. Others booed and demanded rule changes. The betting pools crashed as computers tried to calculate payouts for an outcome that no one had thought possible. In the middle of it all, Deho stood quietly waiting. He had not come here to embarrass anyone or prove any point. He had simply been asked to complete a course, and he had done so in the most efficient way possible. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were learning a hard lesson. Sometimes the most complex problems had the simplest solutions. 6 months after Deho's historic flight, the galaxy looked very different. The news of humanity's 30-second solution had spread to every corner of known space, carried by trade ships and communication networks to billions of beings who could hardly believe what they were hearing. Dr. Park Min-ah stood in the Great Hall of the Federation Council, looking out at representatives from hundreds of worlds. As Earth's first xenopsychology expert, she had been chosen to explain humanity's approach to problem-solving. The translator devices worked overtime as her words were converted into chemical signals for the plant beings, light patterns for the crystal entities, and magnetic pulses for the machine races. "We call it thinking outside the box," she said, her voice calm and professional. "When we face a problem, we often step back and ask if we are looking at it the right way." The concept seemed simple, but it was revolutionizing everything. In the months since Deho's flight, human consultants had been hired by governments across the galaxy. Military academies were rewriting their textbooks. Even the proudest species were admitting they might have something to learn from these strange newcomers. The Mechanoid Empire had been the first to change. Their perfect computer brains, designed for logical efficiency, had always followed the most obvious path to any goal. Now they were programming new circuits that could question basic assumptions. A mechanoid general named Unit 7742 had used human-style thinking to solve a century-old border dispute by suggesting both sides simply share the contested territory instead of fighting over who owned it. The Zephyrians, fastest pilots in the galaxy, discovered they had been making their ships too complicated. By copying human design principles, they built new fighters that were actually slower but much more effective because they were easier to repair and control. Their ace pilot, wing leader Zaraki, publicly admitted that speed meant nothing if you were flying in the wrong direction. Even the wise Etherians found their ancient psychic abilities enhanced by human techniques. Instead of trying to see every possible future, they learned to question which futures were worth seeing. Elder Mind Voice Saren reported that her people's prediction accuracy had improved by 30% since they started thinking like humans. The changes went far beyond military applications. The crystal beings of Nexus Prime had spent thousands of years growing their cities in perfect geometric patterns. After studying human architecture, they began creating organic, flowing structures that were more beautiful and more practical. The insect colonies of the Hivari learned that sometimes individual thinking was more useful than group decisions. But nowhere were the changes more dramatic than in the Draconian Empire. Commander Veltar stood in his office, looking out at the new training facility being built outside the capital city. The sign above the entrance read Human Strategy Institute, in both Draconian script and Earth letters. It was the first school in the Empire's history dedicated to learning from another species. "Sir," his aide reported, "the first class of students has arrived. 50 of our best military minds, ready to learn human problem-solving methods." Veltar nodded slowly. The scar on his face had healed, but his pride had taken much longer to recover. 4 months after the Death Track incident, he had refused to accept that the human had truly beaten the course. But as reports came in from across the galaxy about human solutions to impossible problems, he began to understand what he had witnessed. The Death Track itself had become a museum. Millions of visitors came each year to see the course that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds for 1,000 years. A holographic display showed Deho's simple flight path over and over, with guides explaining how such an obvious solution had been overlooked for so long. The museum's most popular exhibit was a simple sign with a human phrase translated into hundreds of languages. "Just because everyone else is doing something one way doesn't mean it's the only way." Ambassador Kim Jae-won arrived at the Federation Council building for the monthly membership meeting. As humanity's chief representative, he still found it amusing that his species had gone from unknown newcomers to essential advisors in less than a year. The council chamber was buzzing with activity. The Outer Rim colonies had requested human help with their food shortage problem. The Central Systems were asking for advice on their energy crisis. Even the mysterious Shadow Realm species had sent a message asking if humans might have ideas about their ancient territorial disputes. Ambassador Kim, called out Counselor Vexera, a tall blue being with 4 arms. "We have received another request for human consultation. The Spiral Galaxy Alliance wants to know if your people can help them with their trade route problems." Kim smiled. "Of course. But I should warn you, our solution might be simpler than they expect." As the meeting began, Kim thought about Daeho, who had returned to Earth as a hero but insisted he had only done what any reasonable person would do. The pilot was now teaching at Seoul National University, showing students how to approach problems with fresh eyes. The galaxy was learning that humanity's greatest gift was not superior technology or physical strength. It was their stubborn refusal to accept that any problem was truly impossible and their annoying habit of finding simple answers to complex questions. And in a universe full of ancient civilizations that had been thinking the same way for millions of years, that was exactly what everyone needed.